Like the sewage that the Tories are allowing in our rivers, there was something evil just under the surface at the budget. Welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. My name is John Potter and I'm hosting today's chat about yesterday's budget. And as we are going through this meeting, we are getting more and more of the details that are coming out from the budget, and more will happen as the days go by. As always with budgets, the little details that come out afterwards tend to be the real story. But joining me to analyse everything that happened yesterday, firstly, we have the grand old master of the Lib Dem podcast. We have Richard Kemp, the leader of Liverpool. Hello. Oh, you're not the leader of Liverpool. Are you the leader of the entire Liverpool?
No, I like that.
Certainly the leader of the Liverpool Lib Dems. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, nice to be back. I've missed a couple. Is this where we say hello to all our Tory readers?
We do, this way. Hello, Tories. Hello, yeah. CCHQ. Yes.
Get a lot of information from us that'll be absolutely bloody useless to you. If we do it right.
To all those listeners and viewers that don't know, we were in the Sunday Times last week, basically saying that Tories have got a secret Lib Dem intelligence unit. And one of the things he said was to listen to the Lib Dem podcast in case, the revolutionary things we talk about, like actually going out and campaigning and speaking to residents, is completely alien to the Tories. But
if they're looking for Lib Dem intelligence, they've definitely come to the wrong place.
Well, that's bit. You can say that about me, but you definitely can't say that about our guest this week.
So
we're going to welcome back to the podcast, I think for his third time on the show, is Michael Mullaney. Introduce yourself, Michael.
Hello, John and Richard. Michael Mullaney. I'm the leader of the opposition on Leicestershire County Council, a cabinet member on Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council, and I've stood as PPC in Bosworth 4 times.
There we go. So we've got not just Northern today. We've got a little bit of Midlands grit to join our team. Well, okay, let's get on to the budget. All right, Richard. First impressions straight off the hook before we go into some of the details.
Well, first impressions are that it's the only budget that I can ever recall where there were actually no real winners. So yes, even if you say I like beer, and I do, threepence a pint isn't going to make all that. Oh, very good, John. I'm very impressed. I know you better than
champagne
that.
Drinkers, they're winning. I think right off the bat, Rich, you made a say. I think champagne drinkers, people that take short haul flights.
I'm talking about ordinary people.
Oh, okay.
People who don't come from Preston, basically.
Yes, Preston International Airport.
But I've looked down, the people like The Guardian, The Independent do a breakdown of unmarried mothers and old pensioners. It's the only time I've seen every single category loses money, and that's just on the fiscal measures. We know that their electricity bills are shooting up. Mortgages will go up. Inflation's at 4%, which isn't covered anywhere in the figures. So on a personal level, it's bad. But once again, the Tories have failed to grip the big issues facing the country. And perhaps we can talk more about its effects on local government later. No solutions for adult social care, no proper investment in children and children's services. So in 20 years' time, we will be reaping the disbenefits of yesterday's budget.
And Michael, your thoughts on it? I mean, some people have said, because there was before the budget announced, there was a windfall that actually the OBR said you've got a little bit more financial wiggle room for Sunak to actually play with. Is this a missed opportunity, which is what kind of Ed Davey kind of went through? If you had extra money, there were better ways of spending it?
Yeah, I think it's a really disappointing budget. There's been a lot of talk from this government about levelling up, that the government's going to make a radical change to the economic settlement in this country, that for those regions like ourselves in the Midlands and North who've been left behind, and also for people on low incomes, that the government tried to present itself as a levelling up government that would help people. But the reality is, as Richard stated, nobody's better off with this budget. And, we've had people being hit by things like the universal credit cuts recently, which isn't really being resolved by what they've tried to do with the taper. And these same people are going to be hit by energy price rises, by other price rises. Next spring, they're going to, if you're working on a low income, you're going to be hit by the national insurance rise. So all in all, people who are struggling are not going to benefit from this government. And I'm afraid for all the talk of levelling up that Boris Johnson constantly goes on about, I'm afraid that it's just really a typical Tory budget that's not really helping people who need it.
And let's go on the universal credit, because obviously a lot of argument and kind of controversy about the cancelling of the uplift. Now, it's a weird kind of role the Tories are trying to play here. It's like, we're taking £20 off you. Now we're going to give you £5 back, and you should be happy about that. From a marketing kind of presentation point of view, Michael, I'm not sure that works.
No, I think it's been a really cack-handed attempt to respond to what was a really unpopular decision. Lots of people, even in the Tory party, knew it was a bad decision. I know there was an attempt from the Lords to try and get a vote on it, but the government's managed to evade that, because I think they realise that even within their own party, a lot of people are unhappy about it, because the Tories did present themselves, Boris Johnson, as, you know, the party of people who are working on low incomes, who are struggling. This is meant to be the target group of people he says he's for, and he's just really let them down hugely by taking this cut. £20 a week is a big income cut for a lot of people, especially when they're going to be hit by lots of other things rising, whether it's the energy prices, whether it's the mortgages, if they've got a mortgage, whether it's just the general prices in the shops that are going up. So I'm afraid that it's a really poor deal from the government, and the people who've missed out, 7,000 in my own area of Hinckley and Bosworth, several million across the country, are not going to be helped anywhere near enough by this sort of very poor measure that they've tried to put in to make up for it.
But I don't think it's weird to come from the Tory, because it follows their narrative that you're either a striver or a skiver. And they class most people who are not in work, and many are out of work for a whole variety of very understandable and justifiable reasons. So they put some money, not enough, into the people who are working. And you could say that's a reasonable thing to do if they'd have also given the uplift to everyone else. But this is part of the Tory narrative. They cannot understand, firstly, that people who work actually need help, because none of them do, but they're not on 10 quid an hour and looking after 2 kids. And they don't understand that there are lots of people, and this is partly because of our success and its impacts on our adult social care policies, and procedures, that there are people who are incapable of earning, who have as much right to live in decency and dignity as the rest of us do.
And the Lib Dems have put out a figure to all of us who get the kind of the breakdown, is that, you know, a lone parent will still be losing £30 a month, which will all but wipe out any of the increase that they would have got from, say, the raising of the minimum wage. So Labour go through with this. It's smoke and mirrors, kind of, which it is, but it's not a very effective way of actually of campaigning against this. Basically, this budget is actually all about what's not being said. And so there's a lot of and Sunak's being, like I said, thinks he's being very canny with this. So a lot of the things he was saying he was now going to do is stuff a year ago he said he was going to cut. So it's not like suddenly new money that's come from it. And we've seen that a lot, particularly in the north, and the Levelling Up Fund, is that this stuff about, we're going to pump 6 million into X, Y, and Z, but actually a lot of that has already been announced, and it's just re-announcing old money. Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats.
There was one word that didn't come out at all yesterday, which we as Lib Dems must say, and it didn't come out from the Tories and it didn't come out of Labour, but it did come out of the Institute of Fiscal Studies this morning, and that word is Brexit.
Yeah.
For every pound that we're going to be struggling with because of the virus, we're going to be suffering with 3 because of Brexit. Now, that's just a complete lack of integrity, in my view, on behalf of Labour. I'm not sure whether or not any Lib Dem mentioned it, but every Lib Dem should be mentioning it now. So for the listeners from Tory HQ, I'm persuading people to go on the attack against you lot because you caused a lot of the misery that we're now having to get out of.
And Michael, the stark figures that came from the OBR, which just remind everyone is actually the government's own kind of forecasting institution, was that Brexit will cause double the amount of economic harm that COVID has cost. Which came out this morning, which is absolutely staggering. If you think of how world-changing COVID was in terms of our finance outlook, to think that Brexit will be twice as harmful is really something, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're getting is with this government, both with the senior figures, Boris Johnson and so on, from their role in the Brexit campaign and now their role in government, is that there's a lot of big talking up, saying everything's going to be wonderful and fantastic, and the reality doesn't meet that. We've seen that obviously with Brexit, where we were told it was going to be all wonderful, it was going to be fantastic, and the data and the reality is quite different. We're seeing that with the government now, where they said that they're going to level up, they're going to help people, and we've just had a budget which is really just letting people down. So I'm afraid that this government is very good, and the people at the top, Boris Johnson, are very good at talk, but not very good at delivery. And I think eventually people will cotton on to that, and hopefully we can see them out of office sometime in the not too distant future.
And it's obviously very interesting what this does to Labour as well, because we've said this for a long time. Labour's decision to support Johnson's breakfast deal, that they might have supported that as well. Labour's decision to support Johnson's Brexit deal has absolutely tied their hands for anything they can do later. If they had abstained, they could have actually gone on to the attack of all this, but not a single mention from either Labour or the Conservatives regarding Brexit. And Rachel Reeves, I actually think she did quite well, the Labour Shadow Chancellor. And I think actually it was maybe a blessing, because Keir Starmer, maybe a nice enough bloke, but he's very dull. Where actually I think Rachel Reeves has a bit more cut across without the need to call them scum every 2 minutes like Angela Rayner does. But the problem is that all this stuff, Brexit is going to affect Britain for years and years to come, and Labour can't attack on it because they voted for it. And so, Richard, I mean, you're right. We have to be the people that go forward. Now, me and you, Richard, have a slight maybe disagreement, because I think we should be loudly and proudly saying, look, it's time to rejoin the single market. It's time to get into the customs union. I don't think it's yet time for Lib Dems to go full hog. Let's rejoin the full institution of the EU. But I think the economic arguments for saying, look, we need to start getting close relationships again, because we've lost 1 million workers out of our economy. And you can see all the problems, whether that's pigs being slaughtered and not getting because of lack of butchers, everything to do with the supply chain crisis. Brexit is not going away, no matter how much Tories and Labour want to kind of wish it would.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, John. It's a mess. There's a difference between tactics and being having a message that's easily understandable. People do now know what the EU is, for good or bad. They don't realise how the single market was a very important part of that. So I'm quite happy to talk to anyone who wants to get the messaging better than I can. But we've got to renew our links with Europe, no matter how you would describe it.
Anything you want to say on that, Michael?
Yes, I mean, obviously, Brexit has been turning out to be a disaster, as we're seeing. And unfortunately, with Labour Party, I think it's quite similar, I suppose, to the Iraq War, where the Conservative Party went along with it. And it was just really ourselves that were sort of in a distinctive position to have been opposed to it. And the fact that we took the line we did means that we're in a unique position on that as well. And I think as the reality begins to dawn, I think attitudes will begin to change.
I will say probably one thing that also wasn't discussed, and it's very interesting to know, we talked about Brexit, wasn't mentioned at all. You know which other word wasn't mentioned at all by Rishi Sunak? That's climate. There was absolutely no mention of the climate crisis at all in his budget. And I think that's the one that's probably cut through the most, I would say, in the media, is the fact just before COP26, we've had all the issues about the sewage water going into our rivers, etc. And the Tories now doing a U-turn on that, having said that they were being misrepresented, but then agreeing with the misrepresentation eventually. But the lack of climate and the idea of short-haul flights, there could be an argument to say, now's not the right time to put extra duty onto car fuel, because we've talked about this a lot. Not everywhere has access to a good public transport system, but they just seem to be so wrong-headed about climate change, particularly with COP around the corner. Michael, I mean, is that the bit that people are most going to remember this? Is the fact that in a time when we are desperate to deal with the climate emergency, there wasn't a single mention of it.
It is quite remarkable. It's rather like, when Ed Miliband forgot to mention the deficit one year. It's like, well, how on earth can you not mention the biggest issue going, that the environment is such a highly, relevant issue at the moment, and obviously with COP26 and everything else, how could he have forgotten it? And unfortunately, I think it does reflect the fact that within the Conservative government, although Boris Johnson may talk a lot about things, there's just not the delivery there from the government, and just not a care or concern from them. I think the thing is with Rishi Sunak, he is very much an orthodox Conservative Thatcherite. He said he's been, a fan of Milton Friedman and free market economics and all the rest of it. And I just don't think he has the stomach for action to deal with climate change and other things. And I think beyond all the bluster from Boris, the reality is in Rishi Sunak, we have quite a right-wing Thatcherite chancellor, albeit somebody who presents quite a friendly image, and that perhaps doesn't quite come through. But in the ideological terms, he is, very, very, very free market, very conservative, and therefore I think is sceptical about the kind of action that's needed to deal with climate change.
But Richard, that's a really interesting point about ideology, and watching things like Newsnight last night when they were analysing this, saying, look, it's difficult to say you're a Thatcherite and then have the highest tax burden since 1951, I think it is, or something like that. So, where are the Tories at the moment? What is the Tory Party at the moment? I know that not many of them in Liverpool, but lots of comments saying they've parked their tanks on Labour's lawn, high spend, high taxing a sort of economy. The right flank of the Tories not happy with it. So what does this mean for the Tory Party? Is this a temporary thing, or is this an actual change?
I think at the moment they're parking their tanks on each other's lawns. And admittedly, some of them have got some fairly big lawns that could take a tank. But I think that Tory Party are in some element of crisis. There are Tories, like the late David Ames, who actually, as a One Nation Tory, recognised the need for spending. Not wasteful spending. It wouldn't spend it just the way we would, but nevertheless recognise the need for spending. And then there are others who just have no idea that there is a considerable part of this population, I would say probably 25%, who are living at or near the poverty level and need help. So I think the Tory Party is quite split. More importantly than that, oh God, we're giving it away, aren't we now, to Tory HQ? I think Tory voters will increasingly become split over this issue, because there are far more One Nation Tories as a proportion in the electorate than there are inside the Conservative Party, and certainly inside the government. What is the place where people who would say I'm a small c Conservative can go within a Conservative Party that's rabid on these issues? I think increasingly, providing we Lib Dems do and say the right things, we can pull them back to us.
What do you think, Michael? You've taken on Tory, like I said, you've stood in 4 elections now in the Midlands against the Tories. So what are your thoughts on the direction of Toryism at the moment?
I think the Conservatives, I think they're incredibly divided. I think Boris Johnson is obviously a very charismatic politician. He's somebody who seems to incline towards a sort of promising higher spending and really promising people whatever they want to hear. But I think other people within the Conservative Party, the Rishi Sunaks and so on, are much more sceptical about public spending. And, we're told that the government wants to level up. If you look at the extra money for education, it was really pitiful, really low amount of money. Lots of young people missed out on schooling during the COVID crisis. And so we as Liberal Democrats have really been pushing for a proper funded catch-up fund so that every young person can get the quality education they need. And the amount of money that the government gave towards that was really low and really, just a complete letdown. And, in places in the Midlands, such as in my own area, Hinckley and Bosworth, the social mobility levels are often quite low. And, we need to give every young person an opportunity to get on in life. So if you're from a low income background, you can get the skills, the education, the training to get on in the world and earn more as you get on. And unfortunately, the government just isn't delivering the funding for education that's needed, because if we really are about levelling up, it's about making sure everyone's got opportunities to get on and get on in life, and that needs properly funded education and public services, which the government just isn't delivering.
And of course, the other thing the Tories didn't do in this budget, and you wouldn't expect them to, is actually raise the taxes on corporate earnings, particularly the corporate earnings that just go offshore. So we had this fudged look at the non-domestic rate, the business rate. Didn't get to the nub of the problem that our high streets are suffering, because not only is it a lot cheaper to work from big sheds. Now, you could say that's just development, that's just the market. The people who operate the big sheds then take most of their profit overseas. So we shouldn't have been, we could either have got away with no tax increases for ordinary people, or we could have had a lot more money to spend on doing things. But they haven't got the guts to take on the McDonald's of this world, the Asdas of this world. They just bottled it again.
Well, and that's the important distinction actually to be made, because I think this is where commentators oversimplify this probably a little bit. It's not just about the level of taxation. It's who you tax and how you tax, which is actually key. So we'll say like a penny on income tax to pay for health and social care was a Lib Dem policy, has been I think since 2017, but actually we would do that for income tax instead of national insurance, which is what the Tories do, because it's a far less regressive system. We would scrap council tax because it's such a regressive tax and have a different tax system. So there are ways of having a good level of public funding without hurting people. And you talk about things like capital gains tax and other things that will actually help bridge that gap without putting it all on people who are earning. And I think this is something that's going to come increasingly prevalent, that actually people who are working hard, whether you want to call them the Ford Focus man it was back when Tony Blair first got elected, that aspirational kind of class, if they're getting absolutely clobbered, then that is a chunk of votes I think Lib Dems could be very, very well out of if we get this right, because clumsy taxes are not the same as good public spending. And I think that's a key differential to make. And I just want to pick up on what Michael said about education, because it is really important as well. So the government added 1.8 billion to the already announced 3 billion. But their own government advisor said they needed 15 billion to be able to sort this right. And that's what actually the Lib Dems have been campaigning for as well. If you have experts that said, look, it's going to cost you 15 billion to set this right, to catch up all those kids, because they get one chance at this education. And this is why it's so important, is that because if those kids' life chances might be completely ruined if we get this wrong. And so actually getting that right. But so a third of what's required by their own advisor is a shocking statistic, isn't it, Richard?
Mm-hmm. But again, how do you view that money? Do you view some expenditure as a pure expenditure, or do you see some of it as an investment? Now, my belief is that too often this government saves money now. Yeah. And it'll end up, that's my granddaughter back now. I'm waving at my granddaughter. So they will save money now, but the cost of not educating those children, the cost of not dealing with public health, the cost of not providing decent housing means a lot more costs over the years down the line. And some of those kids will end up in one way or another in an institutionalized system, and we know that costs.
But Richard, going back to your point, you're absolutely right. The investment thing is always important, because we talked about, I mean, during the chaos about tertiary education and tuition fees and stuff like that, the statistics were very obvious. For every pound you spend on tertiary education, the economy gets £2 back. That because people get higher qualifications, pay more taxes, etc. So you're right. It should be always seen as an investment. But this government doesn't seem to think long term or strategy. It just thinks, okay, what will be popular now and what we can get away with, and that takes us to local government, something we're all closely involved in. Now, again, the government is spinning this and said we are putting a massive investment into local government. However, we all know they've put 4.8 billion out of the 8 billion black hole that councils are currently facing. So, Michael, again, you're in a position of power in local government, unlike me and Richard from our opposition benches, although you are, like you said, an opposition county councillor. So, again, this just seems to be, it's just not enough. Again, how local councils are going to survive. It might put away the axe for a year, but actually local government and councils up and down are probably going to have to put up council tax significantly next year.
Local government resources have been really starved by this government. And the thing is, during the COVID pandemic, we did see local government really wheel into action, supporting people. There were lots of support programs, certainly where we were, in terms of getting food parcels and other support out to people in need, and just doing lots of good work in the community and really keeping things ticking over during the pandemic. And yet we were told at the time that the government will meet all the costs of the pandemic and everything else, but they haven't. And it's just another letdown, the lack of money coming to local government. If you look at Leicestershire, we're the worst funded county council in Britain. There's a massive black hole. We've got all Conservative MPs. We've got a Conservative county council, but they can't get their government to deliver fair funding for Leicestershire. So we just see a constant, the roads are in poor condition because there isn't the money there to deal with them. There's obviously the huge struggle with social care. There's just a lack of money coming into the county council, and for all the talk from the Conservatives, they've got the MPs, they've got the county council, and they can't deliver. And unfortunately, there's a number of other councils in the Midlands. I know Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire amongst the worst funded as well. So it's another way in which that part of the country often misses out by not getting the finances that it gets from the government. And the reality is that local people see that in terms of the lack of services and the increase in council tax. And unfortunately, for all the talk of levelling up, I mean, Leicestershire is basically at the bottom of the league for funding, and there's no sign of levelling up from the government for us here. And unfortunately, that's just another way in which, for all the government rhetoric, they're just not delivering. And I think they think by not giving money to local government, either other people will get the blame or nobody will notice. But the reality is, it is down to the government that they're failing to give local government the support that it needs. And people will see that in deteriorating services. And really, it's another reason why we need to get this government out, because they're just not delivering for people despite all the rhetoric.
Richard?
Well, the situation is slightly different in Liverpool, isn't it, always? Because we'd already identified that £125 million had been lost, wasted or not collected over the previous decade. That was before we discovered that one of our major road contracts had overspent by £13.5 million, which would then involve £4.5 million worth of interest payments because we had to borrow the money. That was before that contractor went totally broke. So we've had to put an interim contract to sort it out before we have another contract, which will be much more expensive. So there are places where I've no doubt at all, there are efficiencies that could be made, but nothing like the scale that is needed to maintain services at a decent level. Even in Liverpool, if we got rid of all that waste and could magic wand it back into existence, we would still be cutting basic services. But if we then take the next part of the argument, which we've discussed a number of times on this podcast, adult social care, I'm a bit confused about it, because apparently we can put up council tax by 2% and 1%. But at the moment, we're in the middle of a 2-year spending situation for adult social care. So in Liverpool, we put 3% up last year and nothing next year, in theory. Other people put up nothing this year and we're going to have to do 3 next year. Now, can we all put up an extra 1% on what it is that we weren't allowed to spend? I don't know. But even then, it's a sticking plaster problem, because council tax is such an unfair tax, and we've got the poor paying for the extremely poor in places like Liverpool, I'm sure over large parts of Preston and Leicester as well.
Yeah. So here's the question for councils, and what should it? I mean, Michael, this is obviously I'm not wanting you to give away your budget on this podcast, but it's like there's a real conundrum here with what council should do with this. Do they start really cutting hard? So for Preston City Council, we are losing £1.9 million a year, roughly, and the reserves within the next couple of years will be completely gone. But how do then? I mean, from a council point, whichever colour your council is, do you think, well, this just isn't acceptable? We're going to call the government's bluff. We're going to say, look, we'll just destroy anything that isn't statutory services, things we legally have to do, and say, look, or I think one council, and you two, I think it was like a Surrey or something like that, threatened a 15% council tax increase, and it was a Tory-led council, and suddenly the Tories went, oh, okay, we'll give you some more money. But at some point, do you think other councils are going to have to call that bluff, Michael?
I hope so. And to be honest, a lot of this really comes down to Conservative councillors, because if we and Labour complain, then they'll just sort of dismiss that as just us complaining. But if Conservatives can see, and to be fair, I think the Conservatives at Leicestershire do realise that they're not getting anywhere near the money they need to keep it going. So they really need to put pressure on their government to start valuing local government more. Fortunately, in Hinckley and Bosworth, through careful management of the finances and so on, we've managed to avoid any sort of major cutbacks to services and have managed to keep council tax at a reasonably low level as well. But obviously, the cumulative pressures year on year from just not getting the money makes that harder and harder every year, however efficiently you run the council. So it really is time for the government to deliver for local government. But I think in the end, we as Liberals and Democrats and Labour can complain, but it is really down to Conservatives within their party to put pressure on their MPs, because it will be them that they were more likely to respond to.
I mean, they haven't got a lot of time left. We've been saying this. I've been saying this to the Tories at County Council for 4 and a bit years. Things like that. You say, you guys, that we are approaching that cliff edge, and you guys aren't even coming off the accelerator yet. So when are you going to do that? But Richard, I'm just not sure. I don't know if the government cares. I just don't know.
Well, I think if you were to do a blind opinion poll of all the councillors in England, you wouldn't find too much difference between the parties inside local government. The trouble is that whilst when I was the leader of the LGA group, would have a go and got told off by a couple of times against Nick Clegg or our leadership, the Tories don't. They're a very subservient group, so they chunner. They don't actually do anything. And I think if they did, we could deal with a lot of these issues. Eventually, it will come down to how we take on the government. And the problem is, we've talked about tanks before, but they've got all the tanks. Let's be quite frank about it. And I come from a city which tried to take on the government, and we ended up paying the debts for 20 years. That were incurred by doing so. And of course, we've got commissioners in because of the lash up we've made. That wasn't taking on the government, that was just incompetence. But the militants in the 80s took on the government and they lost. So it's got to be an intelligent approach. But the more it's an intelligent approach from all three parties, the better.
So I mean, I'm trying not to give a too downcast thing, because I suppose the thing we should say to any activist members watching this is that, losing councillors and changing things around is what puts political pressure on the Tories. There are elections next year, like I said, lots of councils are up in thirds and there's other elections going on. If you make that difference, there's always a chance for you every year to change that narrative and put pressure on. And I know it's generally across things that most political parties, particularly Labour and the Lib Dems, are feeling a bit, we're stuck with this government, what are we going to do with it? But actually, there's always a chance to put pressure on them. And if Tories, and it's worth remembering, Tories have more councillors than anyone else still in the country. I think they've got 7,000 odd councillors, the Tories. If they start losing significant chunks of councillors, like what happened to Theresa May, it was those local government results which really put Theresa May in hot water and basically thought, well, she's going to have to step down. That is our opportunity.
Well, there might be a parliamentary by-election coming up, mightn't there, depending on what happens in the parliamentary vote with Owen Paterson. We saw what happened in Chesham and Amersham. I think I got that right. Yeah. They changed their planning policies, not as much as we'd have liked, but they did change it. Let's go and scare them again. Let's go and help with the recall petition. And if that's successful, let's go and fight the by-election. They will be they're more worried about losing MPs. To them, it's like the generals in 1914 to 18. Their councillors are the poor bloody infantry. You just go over the top. And if you get mown down by Tories and Lib Dems, well, that's okay, as long as we're okay, because we're sitting in our comfy headquarters in London. But a parliamentary by-election would rock them.
Go on, Michael.
I was going to say, yeah, I agree. I think if they start, of course, in the run-up to 97, the Tories were really hammered year in, year out, 93, 94, 95, 96. So by the election, a lot of constituencies, the councillors that did the work for the MPs got wiped out. And so if they really start losing the local government base, that will really damage them come a general election if they haven't got people to do the work, which is often the councillors as the key activists. And I think this year the Tories got a bit of a reprieve in the local elections because it happened around the time of the vaccine bounce. That effectively bought the Conservatives some short-term support, and I think probably saved a lot of council seats that they otherwise would have lost. But I think going forward, the way the government's going and the various mistakes they're making, I think they'll start losing thousands and thousands of councillors. They can blithely ignore that and say, oh, well, we'll win again, which in a sense is what I think they did in the run up to 97. They said, oh, we've lost by-elections and things before, we'll win again. But eventually it catches up with them. And I think if they do really start losing heavily in local government, then they're in trouble. And if they want to stop that, one of the things they can do is actually start properly financing local government to avoid having the sort of really difficult decisions council's going to have to make in the near future.
And we always like to do a little bit of campaigning talk on this, but we can't sit back and just wait for the Tories to collapse either. We have to be the people that go out and give them that push, so to speak. And we've seen that in areas, whether that's Labour facing or Tory facing, loads of areas with the churn that's happening in politics. They've never had to fight a proper election, or whether that's the Lib Dems having successes in Sunderland or Cheshire and Amersham, like Richard's just talked about. Suddenly, these places that have never really had to campaign come across some people, and it could just be one or two of you taking on a ward, winning a polling district even to start off with. They have no infrastructure to take you on. And actually, that's a really important thing that all Lib Dems, whether you're leading a group, you're on your own, however, whichever way you are in the country, there is an opportunity of you to make a difference. And that ripple effect can, as Michael's just said, can really take hold. And because we're going to talk, just to finish off the thing about how the politics of this will play out. And I think, like we've talked about with whether it's coronavirus or Brexit, you can just feel the tide churning against the Tories. I certainly feel that on the ground as well. I'm getting Tories talking to me while canvassing who are saying to us, he's just an idiot. He's a clown. Well, benefit of the doubt, in May that's just gone, saying, vaccines have come out, it was a tough situation. Now this stuff, and we've just had reports today that living standards are expected to drop next year significantly. That's the stuff that's going to really affect people in the pocket. The fact there's not going to be a catch up on their school children's education, the fact that they are going to be having massive hikes in their gas bills, all of this starts to build up while paying huge amounts of tax into the system. People are just saying, well, what are we getting for our money? Incompetence is a really nasty thing to fight against if you're a Tory, but we've got to be there to be the one, Richard, haven't we?
Well, yes, because you talked before about people being very upset about no climate change measures, and I'm sure that's partly true. But you losing £3,000 a year from your family, that's something that you see every day of every week when you make decisions about, can you go out to a restaurant for a meal if you've got enough money? So can you afford a meal at all if you haven't? Can I afford a day in Southport? If you haven't got much money, can I afford to go on holiday? All these decisions are now being changed by people who have been given the credit of being a party of financial competence. And clearly they haven't been. So I think we can forget all the high-flying stuff that appeals to you and most of the people who read the pod. We go out and say, did you vote to become poor?
Yeah. Michael, final thoughts on what this means, what this budget means going forward?
So I think the Conservatives made a huge breakthrough at the last election by trying to portray themselves as the party that was in favour of levelling up, of supporting everybody, including those from difficult backgrounds. They weren't the party of the past that was only for the rich few. They were for everyone, and that helped them to win places they've never won before. Blythe Valley and other Sedgefield and other places which have never voted Tory before. But what's the reality? The reality is They could have really raised taxation on the very few richest people, the very richest corporations, and used that income to level up and support people. But they haven't. And what they're hitting is average people. And according to the Resolution Foundation research, the average household's going to pay $3,000 more in Tory tax rises by 2027. So that's going to be a huge increase in taxation. People are already seeing it with the increase in energy bills, and they're going to see it in the national insurance rise next spring. It's a really difficult time for people. The Tories portrayed themselves as the friend of the average person, as being in favour of levelling up. But the reality is they're not prepared to take the tough decisions to really clamp down on the rich few people at the top to be able to really start assisting everybody else. And instead, they're hitting average people. So I think in the end, for all but Johnson's rhetoric, people are going to see through it, see this isn't a government on their side. If you're an average, ordinary person, I think eventually people will turn against them.
Absolutely. And with that, we will end today's show. So thank you very much, Michael. If you've liked what you heard from Michael, he's now third time on the podcast. He's nearly a regular. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike T. Mullaney. You can follow Richard, as always, at Councillor Kemp, or CLLR Kemp, in case people are trying to do it. And
I was wondering if next time Michael's coming on, you could warn me so I could go and look in a less dishevelled state than I am.
Because he looks only listening to us. Michael's turned up in a suit with a shirt and tie.
Yeah,
but no,
I think I've got a tie somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere it is in your house somewhere when you do your council meetings. But no, it's been a real pleasure to have you on, Mike. Again, anyone who's watching and listening to this, you can follow everything to do with the podcast at Lib Dem Pod. I said, my name is John Potter. You can follow everything to do with what I'm doing at John Potter LD. Thank you very much to our Patreon subscribers who do pay a little bit of money every month to keep the podcast going. We get no funding whatsoever from the Central Party, despite the Tories. I think we should now. Do you think we should get funding from the Central Party? Given that we
get money from the Tory Party,
to Tory HQ, I think we should definitely put in a bid for some sort of funding. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for either watching or listening. Do keep up with the podcast by subscribing, and we'll be back with more episodes very soon. Thank you very much.
Bye.